The man had been standing at the bus shelter for 3 hours, and nobody had stopped. Andre saw him at 11:30 on the coldest night of the year, the kind of cold that gets into the seams of a jacket and stays there, and he almost walked past too. He had his own troubles that night. He had $11 in his pocket, and a shift that started at 6 in the morning, and a sister 3 states away who had stopped answering his calls. He was tired in the way that a man gets tired when tired stops being a feeling and starts being a fact about his body, and yet the stranger was shaking. Not shivering, shaking. His whole frame rattling under a thin grey windbreaker that might as well have been paper, and his hands were pressed under his arms. And his lips had gone a colour lips are not supposed to go. Andre stopped. He did not know that this small decision, made on a numb sidewalk with no one watching, would walk back into his life 2 winters later and change everything he thought he knew about how the world keeps its accounts. He only knew the man was cold and he had a coat, so he took it off. He took off the heavy brown work coat his father had left him, the one with the torn lining and the button he kept meaning to fix, and he held it out, and he said, "Take it, you need it more than me." The stranger looked at him like he had spoken a language nobody used anymore. That was how it started. A coat, a corner, a cold that did not care who anybody was. "Stay with this one. You are going to want to be here when the door opens." Andre Mills was 34 years old that winter, and he lived in 2 rooms above a shuttered laundromat on the east side of a city that had stopped, pretending to care about that side of it. He worked the loading dock at a freight depot, lifting boxes onto pallets from 6 in the morning until whenever the trucks stopped coming, and he made enough to keep the lights on most months and to keep them off the rest. His father had worked the same kind of job for 29 years and had died with $60 in the bank, and a coat he wore every winter of Andre's childhood, and that coat was the only thing Andre had wanted when the man passed. He took the coat and left the rest. People thought that was strange. Andre did not think it was strange at all. A coat is a thing a man puts his whole life into. The cold mornings and the long walks and the waiting, and his father had put 30 winters into that brown wool. And Andre could feel the man in it when he wore it. So when he gave it away to a stranger at a bus shelter, he gave away more than a coat, and he knew it even as his hands let go. The stranger had taken it slowly, the way a proud man takes a thing he cannot refuse and cannot stand to accept. He was older, maybe 60, with a grey beard gone wild and eyes that did not match the windbreaker. Eyes that were steady and sharp and watching, though Andre was too cold to notice that then. His hands, when they came out from under his arms to take the coat, were good hands, clean hands, hands that had not done the kind of work the windbreaker suggested. But a man does not study another man's hands at midnight in that cold. He pulled the coat around his shoulders, and he stopped shaking, just a little, the worst of it easing out of his frame, and he looked at Andre for a long moment under the buzzing shelter light. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was not the voice of a man who slept at bus shelters either. Andre told him, "Gave the name the way you give it to someone who will forget it before the next block." The man nodded slowly, like the name confirmed something he had been turning over. "I will not forget this," he said. And Andre, who had heard 1,000 promises in his life and watched 1,000 of them blow away like trash in a gutter, who had been promised raises that did not come and calls that were not returned, and a sister who would do better this time, just said, "Stay warm," and turned up his collar against a collar that was no longer there, and stepped back out into the wind. He walked the 11 blocks home in his shirt sleeves, with his arms wrapped around himself, his teeth going, his whole body one long argument against the cold. He did not look back. If he had, he might have seen the man still standing under the shelter light, watching him go, holding the coat closed at the throat with both hands like it was the first warm thing he had touched in a long time. He might have seen the man's shoulders drop, and his head bow, and something cross the steady, sharp face that was not about the cold at all. He might have seen the man take out a phone that did not match the windbreaker either, a good phone, and look at it, and not call anyone, and put it away. And still Andre did not look back. He went home and he shook under his blankets until his body finally made its own small heat, and he was at the dock at 6. And by noon he had stopped thinking about it. That is the things about a real kindness. The person who gives it forgets it first. The winter passed the way his winters passed. He picked up weekend shifts at a warehouse across the river when the freight slowed. And he sent what he could spare to his sister, even though she did not answer. $60 here, $40 there. Folded into envelopes he was never sure she opened. Her name was Tasha, and she had a boy named Eli who was 7 that year. And the last time Andre had seen the child, the boy had fallen asleep against his shoulder on a city bus, and Andre had sat there for 40 minutes, past his stop rather than wake him. He carried that. A man carries the weight he chooses. And Andre had chosen the weight of people who could not always carry themselves. His landlord raised the rent by $90 in the spring. The freight depot cut his hours in the summer, citing a slowdown nobody at the dock had asked for and nobody could explain. By the second autumn, Andre was behind on the rent for the first time in his adult life, and he sat at his kitchen table with the numbers in front of him, and could not make them come out right, no matter how he moved them. He was not a man who complained. He had watched his father not complain through 29 years of it. And yet he sat at that table the night the second notice came, the one with the bold letters and the date circled, and he put his face in his hands. And the apartment was very quiet, and he was very alone. Here is what Andre did not know, sitting at that table. The man at the bus shelter had not forgotten. The man had forgotten for one single day, and the man had his own reasons for waiting, and his own way of keeping accounts, and the timing of what was coming was not yet right. So the autumn deepened, and Andre carried the notice in his coat pocket. You carry a thing you cannot fix and cannot throw away, and the cold came back into the city like it had never left. Have you ever done something for somebody and never heard another word, and wondered if it landed anywhere at all? Hold on to that question. This story is going to answer it. The freight depot let him go in November. They called it a restructuring. The manager who told him would not meet his eyes, a younger man named Curtis, who had started 3 years after Andre, and now signed the papers that ended men like him. And Curtis said the word restructuring twice, like saying it again would make it kinder. They were standing in the little glass office off the dock floor, the one with the broken blinds and the calendar 2 months out of date, and through the glass Andre could see the other men still working, still lifting. Not yet knowing that the same envelope was waiting in a drawer with their names on it. Curtis slid the paper across the desk and then slid a pen after it, and his hand was shaking slightly, and Andre noticed that. And a part of him that had every right to be hard instead felt sorry for the younger man, because signing a thing like that does something to a person too. 16 years, Curtis said, like he was reading it off the page, and then he ran out of words. Andre signed. He did not read it twice. He had read enough papers with bold letters and circled dates to know that reading them twice never changed what they said. Andre took the last check and the box of his things, a pair of work gloves and a thermos and a photograph of his father taped inside his locker, the corners gone soft from 16 years of his thumb, and he walked out across the dock floor past the men who did not yet know, and one of them, an older Haitian man named Roland, who had loaded trucks beside Andre for 9 years, looked up and saw the box in his arms and understood, and set down what he was carrying and crossed the floor and put a hand flat on Andre's chest and said nothing, because there was nothing. And Andre put his free hand over Roland's hand for one moment and then walked out into the cold without a job for the first time in 16 years. He did not yell. He did not curse the building. He stood on the sidewalk and he looked up at the grey sky and he let out one long breath he had been holding since the day the notice came. And then he went to find more work, because that is what his father had taught him a man does. When the floor falls out, he goes and finds more floor. He found pieces of it. A day here unloading a moving truck for a man who paid in damp 20s and counted them twice into Andre's palm like he expected to be robbed of his own generosity. A night there mopping a restaurant after close, the chairs up on the tables and the cook gone home and the radio left on low, Andre running the mop in long even strokes across a floor that did not belong to him, working out the arithmetic in his head as he worked. The rent and the bus fare and the envelope for Eli. The rent and the bus fare and the envelope. Cash jobs that paid in 20s and asked no questions and offered no tomorrow. He sold his television to a man down the block for $40 and watched him carry it down the stairs and felt nothing about it, because a television is only a thing. And a man learns fast in a season like that one which of his things are only things. He sold the good boots and kept the worn ones, because the worn ones were already broken to his feet, and the good ones would bring money, and a man cannot eat the shine on a boot. He stretched a can of soup across 2 days, eating half cold from the can the first night and the rest the second, and told himself he had eaten when he had not. The way you can tell your body a thing firmly enough that it stops arguing. And through all of it, through every cold job and every counted 20 and every half can of soup, he kept sending the small envelopes to Tasha. $60 folded in tissue because Eli was 9 now, and the boy needed shoes for school, and a child should not stand in a school hallway in shoes that have given up, and Andre had decided a long time ago that whatever the world took from him, it would not take that. His sister finally called him in December, on a borrowed phone, the number coming up as a string he did not know, and he almost did not answer. Her voice was thin and scared, the voice of a woman holding something together with both hands that has already started to come apart. She had lost a place. The man she had been with was gone, and the lease had been his, and the locks had been changed while she was at work. And she and Eli were in a shelter 2 states over now, a cot and a curtain and a list of rules taped to a cinder block wall, and the shelter was full after the new year, and they would have to go. And she did not know where, and she was sorry, she was so sorry to ask. She had never once asked him for anything, but did Andre have anywhere? Andre looked around the 2 rooms above the dead laundromat, the rooms he was 40 days from losing himself, the notice in the drawer with its bold letters and its circled date, and he closed his eyes, and he said, "Come here, come to me, we will figure it out." He had no idea how, he had no idea where the money was, or the room, or the time. He only knew that the boy had fallen asleep on his shoulder once on a city bus, and that he had ridden 40 minutes past his stop rather than wake him, and that a man does not put down the weight he has chosen just because his arms have started to shake. Tasha and Eli arrived on a Greyhound the week before Christmas with 2 suitcases and a garbage bag of clothes. Andre met them at the station in his worn boots and his shirt sleeves, because the brown coat was 2 winters gone, given to a stranger he no longer thought about, and he had never managed to buy another one. He had gotten there 40 minutes early and stood by the gate watching the buses pull in, his hands jammed in his pockets, his breath clouding, reading the city names lit up on the front of each one until the right name came. Eli ran the length of the platform and hit him at the waist and held on, and the boy was bigger than Andre remembered, and lighter than he should have been, and Andre felt both those things at once and filed them away in the place where he kept the things he would fix. Andre held the back of the boy's head with one big hand and looked at his sister over the child's shoulder. And Tasha had gotten older in a way that had nothing to do with years, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing to say that the silence did not say better. He took the heavy suitcase and the garbage bag both, one in each hand, and would not let her carry either, and they walked out to the bus stop in the cold, the 3 of them, and stood waiting for the city bus that would take them to the 2 rooms, and Eli put his cold hand in Andre's coatless arm's crook and left it there. They went back to the 2 rooms. 3 people in 2 rooms is a tight fit, but it is warmer than 2 rooms with 1 cold man in them, and for a few days Andre let himself feel something that was almost like enough. Tasha cooked the little they had into something that smelled like a real dinner, rice and a can of beans and an onion and the last of a bag of frozen vegetables, and she seasoned it the way their mother had, and the smell filled the 2 rooms and the steam fogged the cold windows, and for the length of a meal it was a home. Eli did his homework at the kitchen table where the eviction notice had sat, his tongue between his teeth over a page of long division, and Andre moved the notice from the table to a drawer before the boy could see it, and then moved it again, deeper, under the dish towels, where even he would not have to look at it. He helped the boy with the long division. He was not good at it. He had not done long division in 20 years, but he sat beside Eli, and they worked it out together, the two of them frowning at the same numbers. And when the boy finally got one right on his own, he looked up at his uncle with a grin that had a tooth missing from it, and Andre had to look at the wall for a second. At night, the three of them slept in the one bedroom, Eli in the middle, Tasha and Andre on either side of the boy, like two walls around something that needed walls, and Andre lay awake long after their breathing went slow and even, and he listened to them breathe, and he did the arithmetic that would not come out right, no matter how many times he moved the numbers. And he prayed in the plain way his father had prayed. Not for money, he had stopped asking for money. Just for a little more time. Just for a little more floor. The time was not what came. What came was a knock at the door. It was the second Saturday after Tasha arrived. A morning so cold the windows had gone white with frost, and the knock came hard and certain, 3 raps and a pause and 3 more. The knock of a man used to being answered. Andre opened the door in his socks. A driver stood in the hallway in a dark uniform, and behind him on the landing sat a long black car that did not belong on the east side, idling against the curb with its exhaust curling white in the freezing air. The driver asked if he was Andrills. Andre said he was. The driver said there was someone who would like to speak with him. Downstairs, if he could spare a few minutes. And he said it with a respect that did not fit the hallway or the man in socks or the morning. Andre's first thought was that it was about the rent, that the landlord had sent something official, and his stomach dropped the way it had been dropping for 2 years. He told Tasha to keep Eli inside. He put on his worn boots. He went down the stairs and out into a cold that bit straight through his shirt, and he stood beside the long black car, and the back window came down, and the man inside leaned toward the light. It was the stranger from the bus shelter, older, cleaner, a good grey coat where the windbreaker had been, but the same wild beard tamed now, the same steady sharp eyes, the same face, and in the man's lap, folded with a care that stopped Andre's heart in his chest, was a heavy brown work coat with a torn lining and a button that had finally, after 2 years, been fixed. The man's name was Walter Hale, and Andre did not know that name, but a great many people did. He was the founder of a logistics company that moved 1/10 of the freight in that part of the country. The kind of man whose name was on buildings and trucks, and the bottom of paychecks 3 layers removed from his office. And on the coldest night of 2 winters past, he had been exactly where Andre found him alone, at a bus shelter in a thin grey windbreaker, shaking. What Andre had never learned, because he had not looked back and had not asked, was why a man like that had been standing there at all. Walter told him now, the window down and the cold pouring in, and neither of them feeling it. His wife of 41 years had died that afternoon. He had walked out of the hospital and kept walking. Walked until the city stopped looking like anything. Walked until he did not know where he was and did not care. And somewhere in that walking the cold had found him, and he had simply stopped. At a bus shelter, because his legs would not carry him further, and a part of him did not want them to. He had stood there for hours. Hundreds of people had passed him. Some had crossed the street. He was a man worth more money than most of those people would see in 10 lifetimes. And not one of them had stopped because a shaking old man in a cheap windbreaker is invisible in exactly the way the rich spend their whole lives, making sure they never become. And then a freight worker with $11 in his pocket had taken off his dead father's coat and put it around Walter's shoulders and walked home in his shirt sleeves, and asked for nothing and did not look back. "I have spent 2 years," Walter said, his voice rough, trying to understand what you did. Andre stood in the cold and did not understand the question. He had given a man a coat, that was all. He said as much, quietly, the way his father would have, no idea that the plainness of the answer was the very thing landing hardest on. The man in the car. Walter looked down at the brown coat in his lap and ran his thumb along the mended lining. "I had this in a closet for 2 years, he said. "I could not wear it. I could not give it away. I had it cleaned. I had the button fixed. I told myself when I found you I would give it back. And I had people looking. But you do not stay in one place when the world is taking your floor out from under you, do you? He looked up. I found you 3 weeks ago. I have known where you were for 3 weeks, Andre asked. The only thing he could think to ask, why did you wait? And Walter Hale, who had buried a wife and built an empire and stood invisible at a bus shelter on the worst night of his life, said, because I wanted to be sure I was bringing you what you actually needed, and not just what would make me feel better. It took me 3 weeks to find out what you needed. He nodded toward the building behind Andre, toward the white frosted windows of the 2 rooms. Your sister, he said. The boy, the 40 days, I know about the 40 days. That is the moment the gap closed, the moment the world Andre had carried alone for 2 years tilted, and let someone else take an end of it. And yet Walter did not hand him money in the cold like a man tipping a doorman, and that mattered, because the man understood dignity the way only someone who had briefly lost his own could. He asked Andre to get in the car, out of the cold, and Andre did, and the door shut, and the warmth of the leather seat was its own kind of shock after 2 years of being cold. Walter handed him the brown coat first. Before anything else, he handed him the coat. This is yours, he said. It was always yours. I only kept it warm for you. Andre took his father's coat into his hands and felt the weight of it. The 30 winters and the 2 years and the man it had warmed on the worst night of his life. And something in him that had been clenched tight since the day the first notice came, finally, quietly, let go. He did not weep loudly. He was not a loud man. The tears just came the way rain comes, and he held the coat and let them. And Walter looked out the other window to give him the privacy of it, because the man knew that too. What Walter offered was not charity, and he was careful to say so. He had spent 41 years building a company on the backs of men exactly like Andre. Men who lifted the boxes and loaded the trucks and were let go in restructurings by managers who would not meet their eyes, and he had decided, somewhere in 2 years of carrying a coat he could not wear, that he was going to spend the rest of whatever he had left making sure fewer of them stood invisible at bus shelters. For 2 years I had everything, Walter said, looking out the window at the frosted building, and I could not have told you the name of one man who loaded my trucks. Not one. I built it, and I never once looked at it. And then I was the one standing in the cold, and hundreds of people who had everything walked past me, and the only man who stopped had nothing, and gave me his father's coat. He turned back to Andre. I have thought about that every day for 2 years. He wanted Andre to help him build something out of it. Not a handout, a job, a real one, running a thing he was putting together, a fund and a program for the workers his own industry chewed up and spat out, the displaced and the day-laboured and the ones 40 days from the street. Who better to run it, Walter said, than a man who knew exactly what it was to be invisible and had given away his own coat anyway. The sassery he named was more money than Andre had made in the best 3 years of his life put together, and Andre heard the number and did not react to it, because numbers that large stopped meaning anything to a man who had been counting damp 20s into his palm a week before, and that was not the part that undid Andre. The part that undid him came quieter after, when Walter had stopped talking about the work and the money and the building, and looked at the man across the warm leather seat and said, and the first thing the fund is going to do, the very first thing, before any program or any office or any of it, is make sure your sister and that boy never see the inside of a shelter again. He let that sit. I have already had the back rent cleared, he said. You are not 40 days from anything anymore. You have time now, son. Take all of it you need. He had not meant to say son. It came out of him on its own, and both men heard it, and neither of them moved to take it back. Andre went back up the stairs an hour later carrying his father's coat, and Tasha took one look at his face and put her hand over her mouth, and Eli asked if everything was okay, and Andre knelt down in front of the boy in the cold kitchen and said, yes, yes, baby. Everything is going to be okay now. And for the first time in 2 years he believed the words even as he said them. He told them slowly, sitting at the table where the notice had sat, and Tasha cried, and Eli did not fully understand but understood enough to climb into his uncle's lap, and Andre held the back of the boy's head with one big hand, the way he had on the bus and on the platform. And outside the window the long black car pulled away from the curb and was gone, and the white exhaust hung in the freezing air a moment, and then it too was gone. Things did not transform overnight, because real life does not. But they began to move in a direction. Andre had stopped believing things could move. The back rent was cleared, as Walter had said, and Andre called the landlord to confirm it, and the man on the other end was strangely polite for the first time in 2 years, which told Andre more about the world than he wanted to know. Then Walter quietly arranged something better, a small house on a street with trees, 3 bedrooms, a yard with a square of grass that came up green in the spring, and he set it up so that Andre was buying it, not given it. The payments small and the terms plain, because the man knew that a thing a person earns sits differently in the chest than a thing they are handed. Andre walked through the empty house the first time with the keys cold in his hand, and his footsteps echoing on bare floors. And he stood in what would be Eli's room, a real room, with a window that looked out on a tree, and he had to put his hand on the wall. Andre started the job in January. He wore his father's coat to the office, on the first day, the only coat he owned worth wearing. And nobody there knew the whole of what that coat meant, but Walter knew and caught Andre's eye across the room, and nodded once. He was good at the work, better than he or anyone expected, because he was the rare man in that building who had actually stood where the people they served stood, who knew that what a man losing his floor needs first is not a form to fill out but somebody to look him in the eyes and call him by his name and mean it. He hired men from the docks. He tracked down Roland, the Haitian man who had put a hand flat on his chest the day he was let go, and gave him steady work. He found the freight worker Curtis had laid off the same week as him, a man named Dale with a bad knee and 3 kids, and gave him a desk. And Dale sat down at it and put his face in his hands, and Andre let him and got him a coffee and waited. The fund helped 412 people its first years, and Andre knew the number because he knew the names. Every one of them. And he learned that helping at scale and helping one shaking man at a bus shelter were the same act of looking up and choosing to stop. Only the second one was harder, because nobody was watching and there was no fund to make it easy and no salary at the end of it, just the cold and a coat and a choice. Walter and Andre became something neither of them had a clean word for. Not father and son. Both of them had lost those roles and were not looking to fill them, but something. They had dinner once a month at a diner Andre picked, a worn booth in the back, and bottomless coffee, and a waitress named Joy, who called them both honey, and never once asked why a man in 1,000. Dollarcoat was eating meatloaf in a place like this. Walter, who could have bought the diner and the block it sat on, and the bank that held the block, left a tip every time that made Joyce stop and stare at the bill and then look up at the door where they had already gone. The 2 men talked about the work and about Walter's wife Ruth, whom he could finally speak of without his voice breaking, the way she had laughed. The 41 years, the morning at the hospital, and about Andre's father and the 29 years on the dock, and the coat that came out of all of... It came out over those dinners, slowly the way the biggest truths come out, that the worst night of Walter's life and the night Andre gave away the coat were the same night, the same hour, the same cold, and that neither man had known he was the other's turning point, and they sat with that across a worn diner table with their coffee going cold, the way you sit with a thing too large to hold, and let it be large, and did not try to make it smaller by explaining it. Eli grew up in the house with the trees. He had his own room for the first time in his life, and a desk Andre bought him with the first real paycheck. And he did not remember the shelter for very long, the way children are merciful to themselves about the hard years. Tasha found work and then found her feet, and then, 2 years on, found a small place of her own a few streets over, close enough that Eli could walk to his uncle's for dinner, which he did most nights, because a boy goes where he was held when he was small, and Andre kept his father's coat. He did not wear it much, it was for the coldest nights only, but he kept it on a hook by the door where he could see it, the brown wool and the mended lining and the button Walter had fixed with his own 2 hands during 2 years of not knowing if he would ever find the man to give it back to. On the coldest night of that 3rd winter, the kind of cold that gets into the seams and stays, Andre took the coat off its hook. Eli was 16 now and tall and asking to borrow it, because the boy had heard the story. So many times it had become a kind of family scripture. The coat that went out into the cold and came back 2 winters later with a fixed button and a whole new life folded inside it. Andre helped him into it. It fit the boy almost right, the way his father's things had almost fit Andre once and would fit him true in a year or two. "Wear it warm," Andre said, the same words a stranger had once not quite said to him. And he watched the boy go out into the cold to walk the few streets to his father's coat, on a third generation's shoulders, the button holding the lining whole. Andre stood in the doorway of the house with the trees and watched until the boy was out of sight, and he did not feel cold, though the door was open and the night was sharp, because he had learned the thing his father had known, and Walter had relearned at a bus shelter on the worst night of his life. A coat is a thing a man puts his whole life into, and sometimes, if he is willing to take it off his own back and hand it to someone shaking in the dark, asking for nothing, not looking back, it comes home to him fuller than it left, with a button fixed and a debt repaid, and a boy walking warm into the night where a stranger once stood cold. He closed the door against the winter. Inside, the coffee was on, and the house was warm, and the hook by the door waited, empty, for the coat to come home.